go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to this third International IVAN meeting, keeping your lab safe in the COVID-19 world. We are recording this meeting and it will be posted later this week. I'd like to turn it over to David Rice to get us started.
Okay, well, I would also like to welcome everyone to our third meeting and our continued discussion. I hope lots is happening in your labs at this point. Oddly, it's happening pretty slowly in mine. First, I'll do some introductions, and then the plan for today is I will introduce Ken, who will summarize what we talked about last week, and then Dean Olson, who will set up the agenda for our discussion, which will focus mostly on what's happening now in our laboratories. So before we get started, I'd also like to introduce John Webb from MR Resources and Q1 America. And so, John, if you want to say something.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. And especially thanks to our board of directors, the IVAN board of directors, and the IVAN executive committee. It looks like in our, nearly 5 years of existence, the group has become quite popular. And Q1 Americas and MR Resources is very happy to sponsor and at least bring you these cool Zoom meetings. I wish I could serve free lunch like we do at the live in-person meetings, but we're still working on that, right, Dave?
Right. And I think we could make it happen. You just need to get in touch with the DoorDash people. I'm sure they'd love to do it.
No doubt.
Well, and so why don't we get started then? And I'll turn the meeting over to Ken.
All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So I'm Ken Knott from Virginia Tech Chemistry, and I'm just going to do this briefly here. I just want to cover what we covered last week to remind everybody what we're talking about. And what are we talking about? We're talking about running our labs during the pandemic. So last week was kind of a preparatory video. One thing that I found interesting is that the ACS did a really nice slideshow on the exact topic that we've been discussing, and it was a little gratifying to find out that they didn't say anything different than what we had talked about. It was basically the same material, so we're all on the right page. But it is available at that link. Just a Google search at the ACS page, you can find it. It's open to non-members. I encourage you to look at it if you're interested. So what did we talk about? We just talked about what our goals were, and again, we're trying to operate in a mode during the pandemic while we can continue to act safely by maximizing physical distancing, and how we're going to have to change the way we're utilizing our space and our facility to accommodate that. We talked about how we all have different equipment that we're going to have to deal with, the way our labs are laid out, altering our workflow from what we've been doing to what we're going to need to do to accommodate the physical distancing measures and things like that, and at the same time manage our expectations of our users. So we discussed things like creating a plan for our labs, how some of the ideas that we're discussing on here might be appropriate for my lab and not appropriate for your lab. And we all have a unique combination of approaches to achieve these goals. And it's always a good idea to get our plan in place before we're told to do something that's maybe less effective. So we discussed a little bit, I talked a lot about our plan here at Virginia Tech for working a workflow for our automated systems. And kind of as a lead-in to what Dean is going to talk about is has my plan survived contact with the enemy? And it turns out that not totally, because it requires a little bit of attention to detail that sometimes our researchers are in a hurry and they're not willing to do without a little encouragement. So, again, basically, we also talked a little bit about the topics that came up on the AMRO list. And we have a variety of things from administrative level, sanitation, and workflows. So That's what we talked about last week, and I'm going to pass it on to Dean, and Dean is going to introduce this week's topic.
I'm really not going to say much at all. I'm just going to guide the discussion a little bit. We're depending on everybody who's in attendance to actually talk. When you speak, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, tell us where you are, tell us your affiliation, give us your lab status. Are you open yet or not? Keep your remarks brief. We have about 70 people in on this discussion today. We will monitor the chat box to the best of our ability during the discussion for ideas and guidance from people. And try to be general. If you've got a specific little story to tell about your place that has general significance or relevance, that's great. If you think maybe that it really might not apply to anybody else but you, just hold that to yourself. So that's the idea behind the discussion. We've got 6 topics to talk about. All of these came up last time. And what I'll do is look at the clock here and figure we're talking about 8 minutes or so per topic. So we can have maybe 8 people mention something per topic. So let's proceed with the first topic. The idea behind a couple of other things first. One of the points made in the ACS presentation that I think was very well taken was that most of the decision making occurs across the spectrum of leadership, from the very high level to the local level, right here in your own office and your own lab. I thought that was a very good point. So there are institutional considerations, local considerations, and personal considerations about you yourself. So let's keep these 3 things in mind as we go through these lists, this list of 6 topics today. And let's go to the first topic about communication. And again, to start things off, my own institution has communicated quite a bit. There are some lacking details about contact tracing. I know that David Rice has commented that University of California Merced is maybe doesn't have a plan yet, and maybe has not enunciated one yet. So let's hear from some people out there about how communication of events is going at your particular setting. Go ahead, please.
So anyone like to start with what's going on at their place? I will say that at the University of California, we have had an introduction to reopening, which took place through a campus-wide Zoom meeting to faculty and the rest of us who were following along. And it pretty much followed everything that we've been saying here. But the actual process of reopening is probably going to take a few more weeks. So we are going fairly slow, and the other thing is that the University of California as a whole has come up with this plan so that it's pretty well standardized across campuses. And so we'll be doing what everyone else is doing. I think Davis and Berkeley are a little more advanced in opening than we are. So anyway, so that's really what the only communication we've had so far, other than talking among ourselves. So it's come in one big announcement with the plan all set.
Tell us what's happening at Martha Morton's place in Nebraska. Go ahead, Martha.
Hi, Dean. This is
Hello.
Martha Morton from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Like Ken said, there's a lot of problems with communication, especially to those who are non-native English speakers. And we did some pictographs like Ken suggested. For contact tracing, UNL hasn't talked anything about contact tracing for the labs. So I have a notebook outside of each lab where I have PPE stationed, and people check in and check out and discard their PPE on the way out. So they get fresh PPE walking into the lab and discard it on the way out.
Martha, was that your idea, or were you told to do that from some power or authority above you in your institution?
So BioRaft had a presentation like this about a week ahead of our last IVAN meeting, and it was suggested that PPE was the way to go. So I have keyboards that are wrapped in saran wrap, taped down. The mouse, it doesn't work so well, so everybody wears gloves. Hence, we have to have gloves at the entrance of the lab.
Francis, did you have something to say? Francis Picard.
Francis Picard here, Stony Brook University, State University of New York. We're in the process. We had a standardized university-wide. There's no state university-wide guidance in particular. Every university campus seems to be that has NMR. In particular for this discussion, there's more or less general guidance, but we come up with our own plans developed by the faculty, approved by the, with input from the staff and approved by the university administration. We are in the process of opening probably within 1 to 2 weeks. We've adopted a set of plans. So we have PPE as a requirement to enter. We have a weak spot, I think, in contact tracing. People come in and out, but I think we'll adopt a sign in and sign out policy as well. We do have a video surveillance of the entrance to the facility. That's just something that was there for fire and safety hazard because it's kind of in a remote location in the basement of the chemistry building. So they wanted to know that somebody had some idea about what was going on. So there is video tracing there. We do have wrap keyboards, saran wrap, that seems to work very well and avoids a certain amount of issues. We have gloves that are provided by the NMR facility so that we can avoid having people bring contaminated gloves and gloves with other contact issues from their laboratories. Only 3 people. We have 3 instruments in the main facility and 2 up on the top floors. So you can only have 1 person per instrument in the room. There's much more than 10 feet. There's about 10 feet between each of the stations involved. So there's not much by way of social distancing issues that we have to deal with. We do ask that the NMR tubes be cleaned with Kim wipes and alcohol before they're inserted into the instrumentation, and that's about it. So we are working up training videos to start. We're looking in September to start about 30, 40 new graduate students, most of them from mainland China. And so we're going to have to approach the idea of training and contact tracing and things like that. So we have a training video that we're working on, and we're working on Zoom sessions for the particular individuals after they've gone through the initial training video, and then we have we'll have follow-up on that. So that's the extent to which we're going. And as I said, we're looking to, we're starting up 1 instrument today. The 500 megahertz Prodigy probe from Brooker was taken down to save on some costs. And so now it's time to bring that back up. And we'll do that today, and we'll see where we are. But so far, it looks pretty good. It's a robust plan for how people can be in labs, the kinds of things they can and cannot do. We have color-coded gloves that represent specific issues that that might be involved with the kinds of materials they're working with and where they're getting in and out of. So that's about it for us.
On the topic of communication, does anybody anywhere work in an environment where a testing and COVID-19 outbreak response plan has been enunciated by your institution? This seems to be like last on the list. And I'm hearing it again today. Some people have contact tracing plans in place. We don't have any of those. Is there anybody at an institution that has a testing and COVID-19 outbreak plan in place?
This is Sarah Katie at Iowa State.
Sarah, go ahead.
My video is not working because I didn't update Zoom apparently. We literally just got an email from our president. They haven't enunciated the plan, but they are developing a plan specifically for contact tracing and on-campus testing, I believe, through the Student Health Center and through, we have a employee urgent care clinic if there's a workplace accident. So I know that is happening. With regards to our facility, we never completely shut down. You know, Iowa State is, we have been a pretty low number of cases throughout the pandemic, but of course, that could all change in the fall when we have many people come back who haven't been here for 6 months. And so we've continued to remain open. A lot of the precautions that Francis and Martha discussed, we've implemented. I have hand sanitizer. So I have the NMR lab, mass spec lab, and some other instrument labs. I have hand sanitizer by all of the doors. I have gloves. People are supposed to wear clean gloves if they so choose. I have isopropyl alcohol spray by all of the keyboards, shared keyboards. We have purchased a couple of low-cost tablets that we are working on some Zoom trainings. And basically how it's worked is I'm in the office next door, and then we can, you know, I create the person's account, and then I can do the training from next door just to limit that face-to-face interaction time.
Sarah, when you're doing that, how do you know what the person you're training is doing?
So mostly I've only done it a handful of times. Usually I have them point the tablet at the screen, and then I talk to them while they're doing various tasks. And so I can see what they're doing. And then if they have a question, they can, you know, pick up the tablet. It's a small Samsung tablet. It's smaller than an iPad. So it's pretty lightweight, and you can move it and talk to it. Okay. If you need to move it around. So,
Sarah, can I move you along to the next topic and talk about compliance? As long as you're speaking, tell us a little bit about how people are falling into step with your plans in your lab.
In the lab, you know, so like I said, we never fully shut down. The faculty were required to submit a COVID, basically a COVID work plan that discussed their plans for hygiene and physical distancing in their labs. So I think the way most of the labs are operating right now is on shifts. So I trained a couple of students the other day, and one of them was working the 7 to noon shift, or 7 to 1 or something like that. And then one of them was working 1 to 7 or 1 to 8 or whatever. And so that's how they're dealing with physical distancing. Compliance, all of the campus buildings for the most part have remained locked since mid-March. Our labs, we have key card entry, and I know a lot of people have propped their lab doors open, so, you know, just to eliminate another touch point. We've just left the labs locked, and again, providing hand sanitizer and keyboard sanitizer inside the lab. I prop the door open if I'm there in the lab. But, you know, overall, I feel like the faculty have been very willing to discuss with us like ways that they can continue to do research safely. I've had several mass emails to my users and just said like, hey, you are the ones using the lab. Tell us what we can do to make this a better experience for you. Another thing I'm doing shortly is eliminating walk-on time. And maybe some facilities don't have that, but we still have that first come, first serve walk-on time. And so basically by going to an all reservation model, even if it's short reservations, that can prevent queuing in the NMR lab. We're lucky that we have a pretty large physical space. So if you have 3 people in that room, they're, 15 feet apart. I know not everyone has that kind of space. And we have high ceilings and, lots of air movement. So yeah. So anyway, facilities has told us that they're not super concerned. I'm in a modern building with no non-openable windows. They have said they don't have concerns about, air filtration and recycled air. I have a few labs in the older building that do have openable windows, but those are labs have much less traffic. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And I'm very active on Twitter, and people can email me as well if they have more questions.
So I've read where face masks perhaps reduce transmission rates by 50%. And I think that's, the quantitation there is still an open topic. My most frequent non-compliant event is somebody wearing their face mask under their nose. Mm-hmm. And I've put in writing that you have to wear it over your nose and mouth. So you get yelled at, and the common response is, I can't breathe easily when it's over my nose. And my common response is get a new face mask.
So on the face mask issue, I'm actually kind of a face shield proponent. Face shields are supposed to be comparably good and actually better in some ways because they protect your eyes from droplets. They also cause most of the droplets that are coming from you to sort of fall to the ground quickly. So when I'm in the lab, I am typically wearing a face shield. My fiance's work actually is, they manufacture flexible solar panels, but they have retooled some of their equipment to make face shields. So I have purchased some from him. They're about $3 a piece from his company. You can buy them on Fisher, the lightweight, and I would call them semi-disposable. They're certainly can be reused and cleaned, but they're not going to last. They're not going to last forever like a hard plastic face shield. But I find them much easier to wear. I find it's much easier to communicate with a person wearing a face shield. And like Dean said, the research is kind of it's all really fluid at this point, but I find them to be a good alternative, especially if you can still physically distance a reasonable amount. I find them to be a really good alternative. So,
anybody else want to talk about compliance issues in this situation?
I will make a point that in our plan for compliance, we will have an app where we have to assert each day that we're not sick, and so there will be monitoring of that app for people that come to campus. So that is one thing that we are doing, though our specific plans haven't gotten beyond those more general plans for people coming to campus.
Well, that's interesting because we've been asked to do a daily health check, but it's not being monitored in any way, shape, or form. So there's not even an effort of compliance there.
Yeah. So the app is either I am sick I am not sick
Pretty
and
much.
coming to campus, or I am not coming to campus. We're also going to continue the at-home work for any possible work that can be done at home. So people are not encouraged to come to campus to their offices even after the labs open.
According to the University of California BioRaft seminar that I went to, they have developed an app where everyone has to check in, and then they get a QR code that is monitored when they go to campus. So that at least was happening at UCLA.
Yeah, I think that's the app we're going to be using too. Somebody told me it was actually designed at UC Irving.
Interesting.
There is a question in the chat room about do you wear face shields all the time or change them upon entering the labs?
That would be back to Sarah Katie. How often are you changing face masks, Sarah, or keeping the ones you have clean?
My face shield, I've had the same face shield in for a couple of weeks now. I'll find the tweet where I post a picture of it. It's very lightweight. It's like a 7 mil plastic, and then it has just a lightweight like polypropylene headband. It's not something you would wear if you were trying to protect your face from flying debris or something like that. It's very lightweight and really meant to protect from droplets. So the only issue I have with a face shield is you just can't get any airflow to your face, which is the problem with face masks as well. But you maybe get a little sweaty. But whenever I'm in a shared space, be it a hallway or a shared lab, I'm wearing a face shield. When I'm on campus, I wear a face mask into the building, like from the parking lot, just because the face shield is really lightweight and it doesn't hold up super well in the wind.
And it's been windy in the Midwest lately. Okay, let's talk a little bit about access and traffic management. Again, to offer something from my own lab, we had a door we weren't using at all, and we decided to open it. And now we've got an NMR lab with 2 doors instead of 1. People go in one door and out the other. That has simplified things a bit. What else are people doing to keep bottlenecks from occurring in their laboratory? And we're really, I think, talking about spacing people in labs, or we're talking about staggered time. So what do we have going on out there?
Well, I guess Francis from Stony Brook University, I guess the closest we've come to management, we have a requirement that anyone entering the NMR facility, there's no walk-on time at all. Everyone has to be pre-registered. We use FACES system, and they have to leave 10-minute slots between reservations. So, and that seems to work. We have people working on COVID-related research projects already, and they've been there for about 2 weeks. It's not a heavy load, but we do now require that people space their reservations, and there's no walk-on time at all. All people have to be reserved, and that seems to be working so far, at least with the load of traffic that we have in terms of compliance.
Maybe that's a brief topic. Anybody else have anything to say on that? If not, we can move on.
Yeah. Well, I before we move on, I would just say that campus-wide for laboratories, the campus is determining 250 square feet per person for the occupancy of rooms, which I presume will also work in the NMR lab since we have a lot of space. And so I may consider tape on the floor for distancing regions in our open space. I'm not sure whether that will be mandated or not. But for traffic, that seems to be the only criterion.
I guess it's worth mentioning that we have single occupancy restrooms we have single occupancy elevators, and we have labels on the floor in front of the elevators that are spaced 6 feet apart that tell you where to stand when you're waiting for the elevator. But other than
Okay.
that, we're not controlling hallways or anything like that.
That's a comment in the chat room from Southampton. Researchers are assigned buddies. There are clear lines of reporting of self-isolation and infection. The idea being that buddies and small bubbles are easier to track and contain.
Yeah, I mean, let's move on to that topic.
Actually, Dean, this
yeah,
is
go
John
ahead.
Harwood from Purdue.
Yeah,
Can
John.
I ask something just on the previous topic real quick?
Certainly, go ahead, John.
So we've got multiple instruments here at Purdue, and we've got multiple lab rooms with multiple doors in and out and so forth. And I mean, I don't know how we're ultimately going to deal with monitoring compliance, because we can't have somebody in every lab all the time. But I'm kind of wondering, since I've heard it multiple times in these meetings, is there a sense generally amongst all of us that those of us that have open access walk-up facilities, that we're really ultimately going to have to move away from walk-up usage and go to reservations for every single usage? Is that kind of, am I getting the sense that that's where everybody's going?
You know, John, I think you're going to have to make a personal decision, because what we have found here is when it comes to the NMR lab, it's like, you guys figure that out, because we don't know what that is. And I think the solutions are to either control it with some software or have people begin a task, like, you know, every 10 minutes on the 10, so to speak. But I don't think you're going to have anything imposed on you by a higher authority, because I don't think people understand these things.
No, I wasn't thinking from the higher authority. I was just thinking, you know, those of us in the academic NMR community running facilities, are we thinking that that's kind of inevitable in some way, just from within our own thinking, not necessarily as an above down imposition?
I can tell you from the responses that I got off the AMRO list and from the conversations that I've been part of, it definitely seems like people are moving away from walk-up to, like, for example, in our case, our by far heaviest used instruments are the walk-up instruments. And if they're kind of let go without any kind of restrictions, there'd be no way to manage who's in that room. And it would be a real risk for a point of contact for disease spread. So if you're concerned about that, I think that, I don't know how you would manage walk-up use unless you limited, like Dean was saying, every 5 minutes, something like that. But without any restriction, I think it's a risk. And that's the impression that I've gotten from most people that I've talked to.
Do you have any sense of how faculty and users, how badly they react or would react to restricting walk-up or eliminating walk-up?
Well, I can tell you from my case, we've eliminated it. We've closed the room, and now we're accepting submissions external to the lab, and they're using an online submission form to submit their samples. And so far, I don't think everybody is back. We don't have kind of the level we used to have, but we're still getting 40 to 50 to 60 samples a day. And, you know, they may have to temper their need for immediate gratification a little bit, but, you know, people are abiding by the policies. There haven't been a lot of complaints. There is a little bit of an issue with the flexibility of that system for experiments like a 1D nosy that require, you know, more tailoring of it. And for that case, what we've done is allowed remote access in limited cases to those instruments, where basically they would drop out the sample, I'll load them up, and then they're able to control the spectrometer remotely to do something like a 1D nosy. But
Hey, Ken, you know, you've got a lot of automation. Am I correct there?
We have 2 systems, but they're used by 90% of our samples.
So you're talking about loading samples into an automated system.
Yes. But on manual systems, they're all faces reservation.
Did you say faces reservation?
A reservation system through the faces interface.
The software. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here at Purdue, and I don't know how common this is, we're on iLab. We're on iLab by institutional decree, and you can take from that what you want. But for instance, one of the things that, and I actually went to an iLab webinar on this, one of the things that would be really nice is if we could build in, say, a 5 or 10 minute delay between subsequent uses. But unfortunately, iLab doesn't support that in a straightforward fashion. So, you know, and historically here, we have on a couple of our most used instruments had the situation where people basically just come in the lab and wait, and it's basically, you know, one person leaves and another starts with no delay between, and no, you know, obviously no cleaning or anything like that. And, you know, that's the habit that the vast majority of our users are in. And, you know, I'm kind of thinking that changing that is going to be pretty difficult here, if we have to. I mean, if we ultimately decide to do that.
John, were you guys ever closed? Because one of the things that happened here is we were closed for 75 days. And everybody kind of pressed the reset button. Is that a possibility at your institution?
Well, PNMRF never closed. I think actually we discussed this a little bit last time. Now, obviously, when Purdue ramped down, we only had a couple of research groups that were doing COVID research that kept going. But one of those groups is one of our biggest user groups. So they, you know, our regular usage base of whatever it was, 70 or 80 people maybe on a regular basis went down to maybe a dozen. So we didn't really have any problems because obviously the usage density dropped automatically. But we haven't really had that reset, at least not amongst a couple of our biggest user groups, I guess I'd say.
Okay. Krish, by the way, thanks for checking the chat page. I don't believe I'm able to do that while I'm presenting, so that's kind of an interesting little thing. Let's move on to the next topic. We've talked about this a little bit already. Health checks and contact tracing. I guess some institutions are using apps. We were told to buy infrared forehead thermometers.
Wow.
I balked at that. First, I don't know what to buy. It's almost impossible to figure out what is or is not a quality product online. There's a product here that is in use at the University of Illinois. Whether this is a quality product, I really don't know. It's $117. I went and checked myself with a unit that a group across the hall maintains, and I was 97.3 or something like that, which seemed reasonable. But I decided not to buy one because I've got one across the hall, and I honestly don't anticipate walking up to somebody who says they're sick and checking their temperature. We're going to have a meeting about this and other topics here tomorrow, and what I'm going to voice is I don't think it's my job to check your health. And I have 450 users, and I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to buy an infrared forehead thermometer and be in charge of that. I'm happy to know where one is. I'm happy to know where. I'm happy to send you where that is, and you can check your own temperature. But other than that, we're not doing any kind of health checks except the personalized self-health check. That is not. There's no compliance check with that at all. Let's hear from some other people on this issue.
Hi, this is Geneviève Seabrook from Princess Margaret Cancer Institute in Toronto. So just a few answers to some of the questions that were asked just earlier. So for the test, UHN, which is encompassing multiple hospital, decided that we could get tested even if we are asymptomatic. So the institute is starting doing it. So it's just last week, this week, just a few days, but we are allowed to go and get tested. For the app, we are actually using an app, and I hope I can show it. I don't know. Let me try to see. So this is an app, and we have a bunch of questions. So I hope you guys can see it. And at the end, there's a yes and no button. So you answer those questions. And if you say yes, and then you get a pass, then if it's no, then you get a fail. So you have to do that 2 hours before you come to the building. So there's only one entrance. So no one can enter the building without answering those questions. We also get a mask every day when we go inside the building. We cannot wear our own mask. So that's for the app. For the traffic, we actually have floor coordinators. So the floor coordinators is checking that everybody is respecting the rules, a little bit like a police officer. And then for the contact tracing, people are asked to fill out like a schedule. Then they submit the schedule for the whole month to the PI. Then the PI submit that schedule to the director of research. When it's approved, then we know everybody has to stick to that schedule. And then you can, if somebody does get COVID, then you would be able to trace back who was working at the same time. So that's what we are doing here in Toronto.
Genevieve, that all sounds very thorough. What do the floor coordinators do? Are they out walking around and looking?
So I am actually a floor coordinator. Not that I asked for it, but somebody put my name there. But the funny part is that I don't go to the lab. I only go when I have to run experiments or on the weekend. The thing is that, yes, you do walk around a few times. You ask the lab managers, okay, did you notice anything that you want to report? Do you have any questions? And every day we have a floor coordinator huddle. And so we bring up all these issues. All the issues. But I have to say that the huddle don't last very long. Like today we had one, and in 8 minutes it was done. Because I think they manage everything pretty well, actually.
So that would seem to indicate that your level of compliance is high, which would probably indicate that your level of expectations has been clearly communicated to the people in your building.
Absolutely. So we got lots of town halls, lots of them, and people had to attend the town hall where they explain exactly the expectations. And I think and PIs also had to attend PI's town hall where the same, they have to attend and follow the rules. And we have a director of research that's pretty strong on the rules. So I think that's where it's coming from, that, you know, you don't respect the rule, you mess up, there will be consequences. And he's doing a really, really good job, I have to say.
Is that director of research at the department level for you or at the school level?
At the whole UHN research level.
Aha.
So UHN is about 5 hospitals and 4-5, and there's a research institute also. So he's basically checking everybody on the research side.
This sounds relatively advanced to me, and I think you should be proud of that. Is that a factor of you being on a medical-oriented campus, which some of us are not?
You know, I think it's a big part of it, because a lot of people that are working with us are clinicians, and they're still seeing patients. So we have to be very strict on the rules. And that's what happened, I think. I think it's because, you know, the research institute is in one building, you cross the street, the hospital is right there, and people are going back and forth between the two places. So you want to make sure you don't contaminate anyone. also. So
Well,
I think, yes, you're right. It's probably because we are linked to a hospital.
which is no doubt linked to treating COVID-19 patients.
Absolutely, yes.
And also no doubt linked to having some of them die.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we do. We do have people. So we have people with COVID in the hospitals. So we have to be very careful.
That obviously lends a very serious tone to your campus setting.
Sorry?
It lends a very serious
Yes.
tone to your
Yes.
campus setting. So that's
Yes.
great.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Anybody else on this topic? I think we also touched on this topic a little bit earlier when it came up. Institutional considerations. One thing that I would say about my institution is it has given us a lot of time. We were told last week to open on Friday. This is at the University of Illinois. We are a large facility and we were told to not open everything at once. We were told to have a soft open. And this is so that we have time to get used to things. And we did not open all the instruments on the same day. They're all open now, but we had some time to think and reconsider and answer questions and talk about some mistakes we made and so on and so forth. For instance, I left the lab doors open all night. The very first time I left the doors open in the daytime. The doors aren't usually open in the daytime. And I left and forgot about it and they were open overnight. No harm done, but I would say that from an institutional perspective, we've been given a lot of time and in our case, quite a bit of latitude to do what needs to be done. So please chime in on this topic. How's your institution supporting what you do?
I guess maybe I'll chime in here. Again, John Harwood from Purdue. We've had many web presentations and so forth about opening up, and the way things have come down is that each researcher's lab, individual researcher's lab, and each core facility has been told to put together a standard operating procedure. And the university is providing a template for that process. And thus far, the template has only been released for the individual PI labs, not yet for shared facilities. But this template includes, lots of what I consider a fair amount of detail, about the people that will be in the lab, who's responsible, even things like having to draw or obtain and modify as appropriate floor plans for each of your spaces, where you show where people are and give information about traffic flows and so forth. So that, now for somebody like me with multiple, with six rooms, that's going to be a fair amount of work. I guess and these SOPs are reviewed by a committee, primarily of faculty, but I know there's one core director part of that committee. And this SOP has to be approved before the lab can officially open up. Now for my facility, like I said, we've never been closed. So we're still running, even though ultimately I'll have to do this SOP. What's kind of interesting to me, and frankly a little bit concerning, although maybe I'm worrying too much, is I would actually welcome, even though I realize it could ultimately be a pain, I would actually welcome some in-person assessment of my SOP before we open up. Because obviously we're familiar with our spaces, right? But our safety thinking in our spaces is from NMR safety, not from viral safety. And I'm concerned that maybe there's something we miss, right? I mean, we haven't had to think about this before, or I haven't anyway. And so I guess my comment is that there's a fair amount of direction and input from Purdue, but again, in some ways, I think that maybe some in-person assistance and, maybe a bit more institutional assistance and dissemination of best practices would be helpful here.
I know universities, and I suspect mine is typical here at the University of Illinois, dump it into an email and it's done. Post it on a web page, we're done. And that has happened to some extent, but I would say my chemistry department has been a little bit more proactive than that and filled in the gap between the institution at large and the place where we really spend our day.
I'll add for our case that that our NMR lab is just one of about 6 or 7 core facilities that all operate under the same direction at one level higher. And so we have the ability to, and we're just beginning the process of standardizing our policies. But as I said, we're just talking about opening as of last Friday. So we're just beginning that process, which will probably be done in a week or so. So I anticipate lots of support at that level. I don't know if other NMR labs run within higher organizations or whether you're independent reporting to the dean.
Hey, Rich Shoemaker, I see you having a cup of coffee there, and hey, how you doing? So you're still the Brooker guy, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a Brooker guy still, but you know.
So tell me a little bit.
For today, I'm going back to being one of all of you.
Okay, I know that you want to be.
I mean, what's Brooker? What's your interaction with all of these academic and, for that matter, pharmaceutical or any other industrial institutions? You know, what's going on between us and the vendors?
It's really interesting because it's just all over the spectrum, from the private industry labs to the academic labs, which all of you have been really involved. You know, I think the key thing is that as people, you know, Francis is going to get his Prodigy probe back up and, you know, everybody's just, Brooker's very aware of what you guys are all going through and is hoping they can, you know, be there to provide support for all the unexpected things that happen as you start to crank things back up. But I mean, just from what you guys are seeing, it's all, the spectrum is huge of what people are having to do. Some people never close. Some people have been closed for a long time. I had some industry customers, actually, big petroleum down in, you know, in the southern part of the country, that had to shut their lab down and come up with they had to fight to be able to go in and fill liquid nitrogen. Oh, and this is a big industry lab. So they're contacting me, asking my advice and things on different things they might, you know, how they might reopen their labs. So it's not just academia, industry is struggling with it as well.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next topic. And we've touched on this as well. All of these topics interact. We've heard a little bit about the automation approach versus the manual approach. We're doing both. One change we made here at the University of Illinois is you now have to sign up for a time to submit an automated sample. So prior to that, there could easily be a traffic jam at the automated instrument. We only have one, and we're going to have 2 in a year, but right now we have 1. And if 3 or 4 people showed up at that, they just kind of stood around and waited for each other to submit. Now you can't do that anymore. You've got to sign up for a time, a reservation, and only then can you come in and submit an automated sample. I've seen one problem emerge. People are not, they'll take 1 minute to submit a sample and leave 9 minutes on their time slot and walk out, excluding the next person for the next 9 minutes, which I have to change that. And what else is going on out there? What kind of approaches are being taken by users? Please go ahead. Maybe it's a light topic.
Actually, it's not. I am assuming, and based on most of these discussions, that we are just setting up iLab across our core facilities. And so I'm anticipating using iLab as the reservation system. And I have 2 instruments that have been heavily used as walk-up because they're 2 fully automated Agilent instruments. And so the users expect to walk in anytime and queue a sample. And so I would see, based on what I'm hearing, that setting up a reservation system for somebody every 10, 15 minutes for somebody to walk in and queue a sample is probably a good thing.
Probably every 5 minutes, Dave, right? It doesn't take long usually.
Yeah, just long enough to have one person out of the room and the next person to be just coming down.
Right. Anything else on this topic? We've kind of covered this. We can move on, or anybody else want to chime in about anything?
There is a comment. There is a comment from University of Toronto. Maybe I will.
Chris, go ahead.
Darcy. There's a comment from University of Toronto. Darcy, do you want to speak up on multi-prong approach in your one-room facility?
Sure. Can you guys all hear me? Can you hear me there, Chris?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Wi-Fi's spotty up in the woods. We do have quite a few instruments in our facility. Some are in automation with auto samplers, some are not, but for sure everything is in one massive room, including all of our offices, which
Darcy, where are you, please?
Oh, I'm actually I work at the University of Toronto, but I live about 2 hours northeast. So I've been going in once a week to do all the fills and that sort of thing.
Wow.
And making the drive. Gets me out of the house. So right, everything's in one big room. So the way we've tried to tackle this, use, as Krish was saying, a multi-pronged approach. So during the daytime, we've elected to go with a curbside service. So we have 2 doors. One of them will serve as a drop-off station, and one will serve as a pickup station, and they're well separated and both just outside the facility. We will batch submit all of our samples in that way multiple times throughout the day. We're largely Varian, so we have the CPQ, CSV to CPQ script that Varian Agilent can be used, can be used for Varian Agilent. So that's how we'll do that, and hopefully it's just a couple button clicks for our staff, and so it's not too overwhelming to manage all of those samples. We've also are looking at hiring a senior PhD student from a group who has their own spectrometer also in that facility to work off hours and extend our service hours for curbside to limit the traffic. So we're trying to just always limit traffic in the facility to keep the contact exposure risks down, student to student or surface to staff. By bringing on that contract student who has their own spectrometer, they will have downtime on those off hours and they can submit to their own spectrometer, which is good for them. Otherwise, the department has insisted that there has to be access to spectrometers in the off hours, weekends, and then for us, weeknights would include 8 p.m. till midnight. The building will close from midnight to 7 a.m., institutional rules. They figure they don't have enough environmental health and safety resources to support that. So on those hours, we've got an SOP that limits room occupancy, 3 or 4 people with designated entrance areas, you know, an area to pick up gloves, and then roughly the spectrometers count as one big area. So people can see who's where and sequentially move through the facility. And hopefully, because it's only off hours, we don't have big lineups forming out the door. And then for involved experiments, when we're in curbside, we have a staff member on site to help load samples, and then our remaining staff are working remotely to actually support those experiments. So by involved experiments, maybe variable temperature stuff that generally a staff member might want to be in the facility for to ensure there's no damage. Does that sort of make sense to everyone?
It does, Darcy. Thanks a lot. That's great.
My pleasure, yeah.
We'll see how it works. Things are going. Yeah, great. Okay.
There is Dean, there is one more comment related to the automation. Has anyone tried the web interface for Bruker's IVAN NMR and get users to submit samples? Perhaps somebody may want to comment on it.
Just using IVAN NMR, was that, Krish?
Yes.
Yeah, we're doing that. We're doing that now.
Web interface. Web interface.
What's that?
Web interface. Just like the, yeah. That's the question.
Well, I can comment. There are some responses in the chat. It appears that ICON has a remote access portal, and that several institutions are using that successfully. I know that at least one institution is actually, they have made a web-based form for people to fill out or submit samples, and then they take that form and enter the data into ICON, or I think they're copying and pasting it into ICON. So that I don't know anything about the web-based interface, but the copying and pasting in ICON seems similar to what we're doing on the Agilent systems.
Rich, tell us about the web-based system that's being discussed here, Rich.
Yeah, I used Icon Web extensively at CU Boulder, 3.5 years before COVID. Well, 3 years before, but it worked quite well for me. I had labs spread all over the city of Boulder, and I had a Brooker 400 on the other side of town and was able to manage the queue, submit samples, etc. And I had other users who used it successfully. And I just saw I'm going to call out Letitia because she had mentioned in the chat that she's using it as well. So it does work quite well. Even several versions ago, it supported SSL, so you can, not worry about network security. And it doesn't do everything exactly the same as Icon, but I could pretty much manage the queue, and my users could submit samples remotely. And I was doing that, years ago at CU. The other thing I was thinking of mentioning as not as a Brooker representative, but, thinking about scheduling submissions using automation, regardless of platform. My biggest problem was, dealing with getting them to come retrieve the samples after they were done. So I can see scheduling the submission of the samples, but then how do you control the traffic of those who want to come retrieve the samples? You almost need another schedule to do that. I'm just curious how people who are planning this scheduling of automated submission are planning on managing sample retrieval. Just something came to mind.
I'm amused by your comment, Rich, because in our almost total walk-up environment, the students like to use the cheap tubes, and I have a disposal container. And if they don't take them out of the sample changer, I dispose of them. So that is the expectation for my people. If they have a good tube that they want to keep, they better come and get it.
Yeah, we have plastic keyboard sleeves. We spray those off periodically, and when we do so, we take out all the done samples from the Brooker cassette and put them in a beaker that's labeled today's samples.
Yeah, we all did that. My concern was just thinking of traffic management for COVID-19, in that you have everybody nicely spaced, but then they all end up coincidentally coming back at the same time to pick the samples up. And now you have a COVID-19 traffic jam.
The sample pickup location is maybe 12, maybe 15 feet from the keyboard. That helps, but there's still traffic in the lab.
Right. That's just something that came to mind, and I didn't know if people had thought through the back end of that plan, because
I didn't think of it till late.
Can I ask a question? I have to leave Francis Picard here. I have to bail out. Will there be any summary of the questions and answers?
There will be a summary. Yep.
Yes.
And where's that posted?
On the IVAN webpage.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
So let's move on. We will wrap this up, and we're going to throw it back to Dave Rice, and he's going to talk about what's next. Dave, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I thank everyone again for coming. I think that we will certainly post a summary of this meeting, and I'm presuming that the recording of it is successful as well. Both of those things should be on the IVAN website, and Eric is now working to update the IVAN website. And so you should check it out over the next couple weeks as it changes. So that will be one thing. The next real question is where we want to move on from here. The question of whether we will want to have another meeting. We'll have to decide whether we want to have another meeting on COVID, but we're also beginning to think about other meetings on other subjects. And one subject that consistently comes up would be of more technical aspects, and that would be for all of us, or maybe for a group of us to get together and share specifics about the remote operations, computer operations that we have implemented, and to try to organize that into some kind of tutorial discussion. That's one idea I have, but there are many others. So a question that we should all be thinking about is, what kind of meetings do we want to have next on this forum?
There's a comment in the chat room. Topics for next Zoom meeting, maybe demos of various software people are using, like iLab, Shifts, the CSV to CPQ example, perhaps IVAN NMR web as well.
Yeah, I would agree with, I think that would be a very good set of topics that we might, in this case, get the people together who are the experts on each individual who have implemented a particular thing to be the presenters then for it. And we might have one or more meetings of this sort to cover different topics. I'd certainly like to hear about other people that are using iLab, because we're just getting a handle on it now. And of course, remote access, team viewer, no machine, which I've heard about. And of course, people use VNC. So anyway, that's one idea that I'm excited about. So are there any other, do other people want to raise, mention things they'd like to talk about? So with that, I guess I will, we should conclude the meeting, and I would like to thank John and the people from MR Resources again. And John, if you want to say anything.
We appreciate everyone attending, and we're certainly going to be keeping these Zoom meetings going. And last but not least, thanks once again to the IVAN Board of Directors and the Executive Committee for putting all this together.
Okay, well, thank you, John. And so with that, should we conclude the meeting?